Uh, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today I wanted to help answer some questions. And one of the most important questions that we can have is, does God exist? So my goal here today is to very briefly but succinctly be able to answer that question. Does God exist? Answer straight up, yes. And it can be proven. And we can, with assurance, know God exists and prove that God exists. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's define our terms. So what do I mean by prove? Now, a lot of scholars, pastors, educated people, they say we can't prove anything exists. And that is true in the sense that they're using that word prove. Now, what they're using the word prove to describe is a very exclusive word for prove, and it's proof, as in a mathematician provides proofs that something exists. And yes, only mathematicians have proofs. Only a mathematician can prove that there's mathematical theory works. And so any field outside of mathematics, pure mathematics, we're not talking about theoretical mathematics or quantum physics or string theory. Those things don't deal in real numbers. They deal in something called imaginary numbers. But when you're dealing with pure mathematics, yes, you can deal with proofs. And those proofs are important because they show whether or not something actually is credible. Now, every other field of science does not have those proofs. So we have to deal with something that's called another P, not proof, but probability. Now, does that mean that we can't prove that something exists? Well, if you're using it in the strict mathematical terms that of proof, no, we can't sit down and write out mathematically that we can know with 100% certainty that this thing exists. We're now dealing in probabilities. Anything less than 100, even if it's 99.999 infinitum percent, then you can't say that you can prove it mathematically if you're a mathematician, right? But what we can say is that the probability that something exists or is true is so significantly confident, like it is such a high probability of truthfulness that we can prove that it exists. And the reason I use the word prove there is I'm no longer using the mathematician definition of the word proof, but I'm using the word proof that every other human being uses the word proof for. A very small minority of human beings use it for the scientific, scholarly, we can know, we can prove, we can write it down on a piece of paper and mathematically show the proof and evidence. Very few people fall into that category. Mass majority of us, when we say, I can prove that I love my wife, I can prove that I exist, I can prove that I have money in my bank account, I can show you my bank account. Those are not mathematical proofs, but it is a different use and tense of the word proof. So now that we've defined terms, I'm here to tell you today, yes, we can prove that God exists. Now, with that being said, I'm going to propose to you the probability spectrum of the word prove. Now, since we're dealing with less than 100% certainty, which is pretty much everything outside of pure mathematics, proof is now a matter of probability. What is the probability that something is or is not? So, in science, it's pretty well understood that I think it's, I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's 1 in 10 to the 42nd power is a probability that anything above that is pretty much not gonna happen. It's a probability that's so extreme that in the entire time span of the universe, if everybody was given an opportunity for this to happen, it will not happen. So 1 in 10 to, I think it was 42. But just to give mercy and grace to any of the skeptics and the doubters, we'll even go to 1 in 10 to the power of 80. Now, that power, those are zeros. So we start off with 1 in 10. I think it comes out to about 10 million. And then for every power 2, you just add a 0. So that's 80 zeros after the 1 in 10. So, if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. And the only way I'd be wrong in that is if it's a bigger number than what I just said. So the only possibility is that my math is wrong and the number's bigger than 80 zeros. But either way, that's currently my understanding of the math. The reason I bring up those numbers is because the probability that God does not exist is currently a number greater than 1 in 10 to the power of 80, which is understood academically in all fields of study, that if you have something 1 in 10 to the power of 80, that it will not happen. Like, it is, if the probability that this thing could not be 1 in 10 to the power of 80, it won't happen. So if we're dealing with anything above 1 in 10 to the power of 80, then you can definitely be assured it's not going to happen. Ever is impossible. It won't happen. Now, with what we can currently understand based on science, what we have proven scientifically within all of the other fields. Now remember, I just used the word proof again, not using the mathematician's term proof. I'm using the common term proof used by every other scholar and academic and every other person on this planet other than mathematicians. So the probability that God exists is so high and to such an extent that just one mathematical field that we have studied, the probability that the universe is the way it is and the way it's all lined up and everything happened the way that it happened, the probability that it would be a different way than it is right now is 1 in 10 to the 140. I think it was 142. 1 in 10 to the 142. Now the reason I'm not going into this of the specifics right now is I'm just trying to introduce the concept, can we prove that God exists? Absolutely, definitively, yes. Now, I hope I don't lose anybody from that immediate standpoint, but I just want you to hear me out, and I want you to understand the terms that are being thrown around among scholars, among pastors, among academics, among atheists, you name it. So, can we have confidence that I'm going to be sitting here right now talking to you and I'm not going to suddenly turn into an elephant? Yes, we can have confidence of that. What's the probability that something like that would happen? Now, I'm not a mathematician, but the number would be significantly less than 1 in 10 to the 142nd power. It would be more probable that I, sitting here right now, would spontaneously turn into an elephant. Now, so if the fact that God exists is all the way up to 142, and it's more likely that I would turn into a spontaneous elephant than God not existing, we can say with certainty that God exists. Now, for everybody out there that doesn't believe in the Christian God, that's wonderful. We're going to have conversations about that. That's going to be dealt with in a different video. But right now, we are just establishing the fact that we can prove and we can have confidence that we know God exists. Now, I'm reaching the end of this video and the end of my time frame. As a plane flies overhead, and probably adds a lot of volume, so I'm going to have to project my voice a little bit better. But I'm going to throw just a little bit of confidence at you on the facts, so that you don't just have somebody sitting here on a river trying to tell you that God exists and that and the defining of terms without any actually evidence or facts to establish the definitions that I've just proposed and also the claims I'm now proposing. So, can we know God exists? Yes. Is the probability that God exists? Yes. Anybody that is currently holding a position that says God does not exist, you are taking a position and a standpoint that it is more likely that any person standing around you would spontaneously turn into an elephant. It is more likely that that would occur than for God to not exist. So you are taking a probabilistic standpoint to such an extreme that you no longer hold ground to stand on. The ground below you most likely is more likely to spontaneously stop existing than the probability that God exists. Okay, so I'm about to spout out a lot of information really fast, and the reason is because it is too big to fit into this time frame. I believe I now have currently about 30 seconds left on this video, so I'm going to say it fast. Science has, fortunately and unfortunately, put the entire human race into a corner where they have no choice but to believe in God existence. And right now, there's a lot of people that don't want to admit that. But when you go to the highest levels of all scientific understanding, throughout the last 100 years, we have been growing closer and closer to understanding that all of the data we have points to God existing. Now, all of you know that I'm about to mention the Big Bang. It is we are so close to universally accepting, even among atheists, that the Big Bang demands that somebody fitting the category and seat and position and authority of God needs to be there. And fortunately, atheists have done the work for me, and they have put somebody in that seat. Now, atheists do not say that God sits in the seat and authority of who established the Big Bang. They say they put the multiverse into that seat. Now, not all atheists believe in the multiverse, but I would say mass majority of them default to the multiverse being the position and the authority holding the creation of the Big Bang. Now, when you go into the multiverse and string theory, as proposed by Stephen Hawking, the person and authority that holds the title of the creator of all things, including the multiverse, because we can't just propose more universes and say more universes created this universe. Something has to be the origination. Stephen Hawking says that there's a multiverse engine that is impersonal. Hey, ladies and gentlemen. So it looks like my phone overheated or reached its 15-minute time limit. I don't know which one, but it cut me off. And so it deleted a little bit of what I wanted to say. We were talking about the multiverse engine. Maybe it's a good thing they cut me off because I went on a little bit long. But ultimately what I wanted to summarize is that defining of terms is important. And in string theory, atheists already establish that there is a engine creating universes. And this engine has all of the characteristics that God has. Now, God has more characteristics, but they're in all of the characteristics that they give the engine, God has, excluding the characteristics that they give the engine for no good reason. For instance, Stephen Hawking goes out of his way to establish that the engine is impersonal and does not know what it's creating or has no intention on what it's creating, what it's making, which is impossible. In order to create something, you have to have intention in order for it to have change. Change is the big word that I want everybody to take away from today. I want you to consider change. If something is changing, then it's changing with intention. Nothing's changing without intention. Therefore, something is intending that change. Something has a purpose. Something is behind that. Now, we look at the change all around us. and we say to ourselves that there's nothing intending this behind us. Now, we're not going to get there, because then the Christians and the atheists are going to completely divide, and we're going to walk separate ways, and we're not going to listen to each other anymore. So I'm not going to propose the Christian theology of that all of this has intention behind it, and because that's the argument. That's what we're sitting here, and that's what I'm trying to answer. So we're going to stick to, can we know God exists? And here's the thing. Anybody that doesn't believe in the Christian God, I want you to go to all of your scientific books and look for the word change. Natural selection, by its nature, something is being selected. There is a purpose behind the selection. It is not random. It can't be random. If it was random, then evolution and natural selection would not exist. So, in its most basic form, we agree that there is a purpose behind all of it. We just disagree on who is the originator of that purpose. Now, if you fall in the category of atheist that says Stephen Hawking's string theory multiverse is the originator of all of this purpose, that's cool. Then we can have a conversation. And then if you go on the Christian perspective that says God is the originator, where they both share the same characteristics minus a few, God having a few more characteristics than this machine, but all of the characteristics that this machine, that the atheists agree upon, share with God. So we both agree in the Creator, in God, in all of his characteristics being eternal, all-powerful, creative, and acting in a purpose, changing with a purpose and an intention. There's an intention behind evolution. There's an intention behind the engine multiverse engine that's proposed by Stephen Hawking. You can't get away from it. There is somebody or something creating everything with a purpose and intention, all-powerful, eternal. So that's my proposal to you guys today. Answer the question, does God exist? Yes. Definitively yes. If anybody walks around with the probability, with saying that God does not exist, they are walking around saying that it is more probable that the ground you are walking on below you will stop existing than that God does not exist. Now, are we talking about the atheistic God, where he's impersonal, it's an engine, and it's a multiverse engine, it's created for all those things? Or are we talking about the Christian God, or are we talking about fill in the blank, any other God? We could be here all day listing the different religions. So we know that something exists that fits the characteristics and categories of God. Science has definitively proven that. The probability that it doesn't exist is so high that it would be dishonest to say that we believe otherwise. So, ladies and gentlemen, starting from now on, when we have conversations, I want you guys to listen to the person that's talking and define terms and try to find where there may be common ground and a misunderstanding of each other's words and terms. When one person uses the word proof and they mean a mathematician's proof. Another person uses proof and they mean the common layman's terms of the word proof, meaning highest probability to understand that it is true. Something is true. We can know that things are true. We can know that things exist. And we do know that God exists. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for holding on for this long. It's now been a 20-minute video. I hope to answer more of your questions throughout these videos, and God bless. And I'll see you guys around. Have a beautiful day.